Adrian, welcome to Startup Grind.
Hello.
Hope you're well today.
Very good, very good. Here in the south of England.
So today we're going to talk about how you can use AI to fast track and create an MVP faster. But before we begin today's core topic, can you briefly introduce yourself and your experience with AI?
Yeah, I'm Adrian Stuart. Actually, my original background going all the way back to university was computer science and artificial intelligence. I didn't actually continue on with that when I went into the working world. I ended up in digital marketing. And then during COVID, I learned how to code again, and I started going back into tech, ultimately ending up working for Neuralab and finding myself working in an AI company. So it sort of came full circle.
So your involvement with AI has come quite recently.
Yeah. So during COVID, during one of the lockdowns, when I learned to code again, I started learning Python. From there on, obviously, Python is predominantly used for machine learning, and started on that. My main reason for getting into AI was essentially seeing this coming transformation across the work industry, and decided it was probably better to learn how to use AI tools rather than not. So that's how I ended up.
Yeah, and I think that's a good foundation for today's talk, because if you don't use AI, then your competition will use AI, and that, of course, will be a game changer. Now, today we're going to talk about MVP. And to set the scene, so your definition of an MVP and sort of the importance of in its life of a startup?
I would say, MVP is essentially the minimum number of functionality that you can do that will be a workable product for a client. You want to reduce that down as much as possible, because extra functionality adds extra complexity, takes extra time, more debugging. So it's essentially a product that you can show to potential investors that gives them an idea of how it'll work, but with the minimum set of functionality.
And I think that's you had two crucial words there: show, investor, and minimum effort, because you want to get feedback as soon as you can if you're on the right track or if this is investable and so on. So in your opinion, why
Absolutely.
So in your opinion, why is AI crucial for startups creating MVPs today?
So I'm sure most people here will have heard about GPT and similar technologies that have started to come into the public consciousness over the last few months. Essentially, these tools are going to be able to speed up the whole process of MVP. And they're going to be able to help, especially small teams, augment the skills that are needed for being able to build an MVP. We won't have skills across all different areas that we need for a small company. You're not necessarily going to have specialists in security or other fields. So these sort of AI tools are going to help people be able to build products, test products, do the marketing, emails, all sorts of aspects of the MVP, which with a small team will dramatically improve their ability to perform.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the crucial things is there, as you said, augment the skill set, because if you're a super narrow tech-driven startup, you still need to be visible in some way, and you still need to have documentation and things around that. And there, of course, the AI can help a lot to create those things around an MVP. It could be just as simple as a questionnaire to verify that you're on the right track, and then you might have 5 good questions, but you put them in ChatGPT and you get 10, 15, and then so on. So if you look at how AI fits into the MVP process, what can AI not do today?
At the moment, to be honest, I'm not totally sure. The GPT-4, for example, from OpenAI is potentially one of the most complex things humanity's ever built. It is a huge landscape that we are exploring at the moment. Quite what its capabilities are going to be, I'm not really sure at this point. Obviously, if you've used ChatGPT, you can feel some of the limitations within ChatGPT. But that's very much a one-on-one conversation. It doesn't have a lot of capability of either being able to use external tools or use things like agents or some of the other more complex things that these technologies seem to be able to do. One limitation that I've definitely come across is speed. They are slow. If you are wanting it to real-time process language, like a meeting like this, and then trigger various other things as you go, they can't really do that after processing, or sort of like processing in there and slowly doing things in the background. Speed is probably one of the main issues at the moment. And cost. They are expensive. They're expensive to run if you're doing any sort of scale. But all of these things, if anybody who works with tech, give it 2 years and it halves in price, doubles in speed. So these things will change.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As you said, it's a one-on-one conversation. Maybe just a simple step is to have you can have a group chat with it. I guess you can do it through Teams, but in the sense of a startup day, everybody's kind of bouncing ideas with ChatGPT as a group. That's one thing. The other one I found on Thursday this week, I was running a board meeting in Swedish, and here are some of those limitations that it's not a big enough market to have transcribing Swedish language to. You can do it on an app Macintosh, but it's not as good as if it was English. But it's there, and also I think that there's also an opportunity there for people to develop things that are a bit narrow in that sense. Cool. So in this call, we're going to discuss a number of different technologies, and instead of everybody writing down all of them, we are collecting them and sending them out afterwards in an email. So can you give an overview of the AI technologies that startups can use to speed up the creation, as you said, to augment internal skills at meetings and so on?
Starting with the most basic would be using ChatGPT or similar, Claude 2, ChatGPT, any of these sorts of texts. I have been suggesting to everybody that I know that they have ChatGPT always open at the side of their computer, right? So if you're having a meeting and people are coming up with lists of ideas, put all those ideas in there and see what it comes back with. That would absolutely be the most basic of all of them. Learn how this works. They sort of have a personality, and over time, as you develop your prompt skills, you will get better and better and better output. There's obviously, for the coding side of things, if you're actually the people who are developing the MVP, tools like Copilot, extremely good. Actually, the combination of Copilot and ChatGPT is very powerful. We found that within our company. And then there's lots of other ones like PDF readers. So, for example, you can give it a PDF, and then you can have a conversation with the PDF, which is great for anything that's large and you don't want to spend many hours reading. Summarization, again, similar sort of thing. You can take a PDF and summarize it down. In fact, I think in a previous meeting that you and I had, I took the transcription from our meeting and summarized that down and send that to both of us. So we were able to go back and have a bit of a look at that. These are quite sort of simple tools, but they can speed things up a lot, especially when you're processing large amounts of information and want to summarize it down.
Yeah, and that's a good summary of speed up and a lot of different tools. And we're not going to just, as I said, we're going to send them out afterwards. But it is, I think, as you said, it's also to have that next to you at the meeting, and it will become second nature for us to actually do that. Today, yes, I have it on the phone, and I can write to it. I can use it on the phone, and I can WhatsApp it and so on. Now, when you're looking at creating an MVP, sometimes I've seen these drawings, like a stick drawing of a car, and then what is an MVP? It is what are the sort of primary benefits of using AI to create an MVP versus not using it?
I would say the 2 points we've made so far: preliminary speeding things up, and secondly, augmenting your skills or your knowledge. One example that we had was dealing with a security issue. Within our company, we're a relatively small company, so we don't necessarily have the very specialist skills to be able to deal with everything that comes your way. And being able to use GPT to come up with security ideas of how to secure systems was something which we were able to do in an extremely short period of time, or at least come up with the ideas. Fantastic tool, particularly. Obviously, security is very important to all companies, and to be able to get that sort of help without necessarily having to hire somebody who's a specialist in that, great advantage. Yeah,
and I mean, you always need to get somebody in to pen test your product and all that stuff. But if you can close those first 9 doors, and then they find a 10th one, the 10th problem, you're not going to spend the money and the time to fix those first 9. So, yeah, as you said, asking those questions.
I would add to that, some of the new AI systems will likely be able to do the pen testing for you pretty soon. Obviously, all the bugs, all the errors are all logged in various databases. So very quickly, these AIs are going to know how to do the pen testing for us. So we won't even need to do that.
Yeah, and then still you get so much more secure, and then you kind of use the ingenuity, and maybe it's in a way also that an AI can do brute force in a way that a human would kind of give up or has to use scripts and so on. Now, all of this sounds very good, and I'm all for using AI to speed up processes. But what are some common challenges or pitfalls teams face when trying to sort of fast track their MVP and AI? Sort of like what not to do.
I think one of the things that we have found is in using these things is not to immediately go to these systems. Make sure it's a human first process. If you're in meetings, make sure the discussion is between you and your teammates, and use that information then to augment the output from these systems. So let's say you're coming up with a bunch of ideas for a new product, or some logo ideas, or whatever it is. You're coming up with a list of ideas. Take that list and then stick it into these systems, and then use that as a way to get more ideas. That's very powerful. It's very easy to just get really lazy and just, well, I'll just get the system to do everything and then not really think about it too much. But that disconnect between the thought process of getting there and the output, I think that's not great for teams. That's not great for the thought process itself and the creativity. So think first, then use that to augment. That seems to be one good way. And secondly, like I was saying earlier on, speed is an issue. If you're using something like ChatGPT in a meeting, everybody just basically sits on pause while it slowly writes its thing out. That's not that great. But again, that will change. That will change over time. And also, if you have access to some of the back-end stuff, so if you're using the API rather than the ChatGPT interface, you can use the faster models. They're not quite as good, but the speed is it's quite a speed up.
Yeah, speed and yes, it's more fun to watch ChatGPT write than watching Paint write, but yes, it can sometimes take a bit of time, and especially if you use, I guess, the code interpreter or something like that, it sometimes has to reiterate a couple of times, and then if you're a group of people, some might think it's a bit, it feels like a waste of time. However, what I also seen, as you said, using it creatively, I saw somebody, a YouTube video, a person, they were working on a test, and they had all the questions, and then they asked, make these test questions silly. And just out of that came new ideas, because that silliness added sort of a new dimension for these ideas. And then, of course, they could take the silly questions and replace the silliness with real world people, and they had even more questions. So as we learn how to use these tools, we don't just strict ask, make this more sales presentation. Asking it to make a silly presentation or a silly idea might actually give you more ideas. Now, we talk about speed and we talk about resources, and time is one of the world leading resources we don't have endless of, but it's also money. So for a startup with limited resources, how can they use AI to create MVPs without breaking the banks or hire an AI expert?
So this discussion we're having at the moment is really about where we are at the moment. But these things are changing very quickly. The capabilities of certainly these generative AI systems seems to be growing at rather exponential growth. If we look back at GPT-2, which was only I don't know, a year ago or so, it was mostly like a mumbling child. And then if we look at the capabilities of GPT-4 today, it's stepped up a lot. So what we will be able to do with it will probably change a lot. Some of the tools that are available now, giving an idea of what's coming in the future, are things like AutoGPT, where you would be able to basically put in a text prompt asking it to finish a task. So for example, you were coming up with a new product and you needed to do marketing. You could just tell it to come up with a marketing plan and describe the product. It would then go away and produce all the different stuff that you would need. For example, social media posts, emails, lists of people to email, telephone numbers, companies you might want to market towards, etc., etc., etc. So these sort of systems where it's not just the prompt you have a conversation with, but you give it a small task to do and it'll go away and complete the entire task. These kind of systems are getting very, very close. In fact, you can do this now. I know in the email you can be sending out AutoGPT. Anybody with a little bit of tech background can install that and give that a try and see what future is coming and how much more powerful these tools are going to be, rather than just the conversational element we're having with GPT at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And yesterday I was testing out a product called Clarify. It's a process that, I mean, you have swim lanes and processes, and we will include this in the email. But they have also built in ChatGPT. So you basically said, I want to describe a process of purchasing, and just like months ago, you had to do this all manually. Today, it actually goes out to ChatGPT, it comes back and starts to create the swim lanes and the processes and all that stuff, and even gave you some examples of potential risks. And that product, that takes such a product like leaps and bounds. Now in 2023, you can be a marketing expert, but do you need to be an AI expert to use AI?
Not with these tools. There's sort of like two broad swathes of AI. We sort of have narrow AI, which is what we've been using up to now, which is really just machine learning. They take a lot of time and a lot of effort to build, to gather all the parts together, the data, the training, all the systems you have to build around it. They take quite a long time. This more general AI that generative AI seems to be, that takes much less skill to set up and get working. Everybody, I assume, has had ChatGPT up and running. You log in for it, and that's it. Away you go. Now, obviously, the more specialist a system you want, the more effort it requires. You can take something like ChatGPT. There's various open source versions. Meta released one called Llama recently, which is being iterated on a lot by the open source community. You can take that, you can take your data, and you can fine tune that to specific tasks that you need within your company. That would take rather more skill to be able to do. So it really depends what the thing is you're trying to do. More targeted is probably the more you will need somebody specialist to do it. But just to sit down with ChatGPT and use that's a login username. I suggest you pay the $20 to get GPT-4 within ChatGPT, but that's all the skill that's required, and learning how to use it, how to speak to it. Yeah, I think generally now, at least with some of these tools, you can do a lot on your own without actually necessarily having to hire someone. But if you're then wanting to take that into being a product, that's another step up. Once you actually start saying, hey, I want to use ChatGPT or GPT-like things actually within my product itself, that's an extra layer of complexity. And that's the point at which you probably need to bring some specialists on to be able to set all of that up, to deal with the scale, to deal with guardrailing, right? There's a lot of issues about safety of these things. Some of the open source models have had all the safety removed from them. So you'd really want to make sure that your product didn't say anything or do anything unexpected you don't want it to do. So again, yeah, it really depends. If it's just something you're using within your business as a business tool, you can go off and do that today. If it's something you're wanting to use within your product, then at that point you're going to need to hire somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah.
When we look at that, using it as a tool within your business, how much sort of computer power do you need actually to run something? You mentioned Llama, Meta. What is needed? Just sort of a ballpark figure.
Yeah, so that rather depends. It depends on the size of the model. One of the interesting aspects of this has been, as these models have been released into open source, the open source community has gone to work on them and been able to do a lot of stuff that the larger companies have been unable to do. Probably runs on some pretty extensive hardware that not many of us will be able to afford to do. That's just for inference. For running it, for training it takes an even larger amount of hardware. None of us will be able to do that. However, these open source models, one of the first things people have been doing is figuring out ways of streamlining it. So some of the smaller models, Llama-based models, you could run on your smartphone. So obviously it loses some capability, but maybe for whatever it is that you're looking to do, that capability is enough. So really, it depends on the size of the model, and it depends on the application you're wanting it to be able to do. So everything from the smartphone all the way up to massive data centers.
Yeah, and I guess that comes also, as you mentioned, the narrow AI. If you are route optimizing, and that's what your product is all about, you not that you can't use a bigger, but if you have a smaller model, then of course, and in the end, it comes down to CPU cycles and heat and cost and electricity and all that stuff. And as your business scales, those will become very important factors. In a small setting, not a problem. Yeah.
Also, just to add one thing. Once again, we are very much at the beginning of this. ChatGPT is very much alpha. Don't think this is the end of it. I know some people have tried out ChatGPT and gone, "Oh, this is rubbish." We're very much at the beginning of this process. These models are likely to get smaller and smaller very quickly. Processing power is one of the limitations. Obviously, none of us all have access to a data center. So I would say probably you will find in the next 6 months, 1 year, some of these models will easily get small enough to be able to run on just personal devices. So as we say just now, yep, you might need a data center, but a year, 2 years, probably not.
Yeah, as the models get distributed to the edge, then we will of course then not have that speed issue, most likely, that it will be much more reactive as we use it in a meeting. And of course this question, as you mentioned, about the new models and so on, opens up the interesting question. So if you're a startup and you want to build, so if you're, what is your suggestion to a startup that wants to build an AI in regards to the MVP? What do they need?
So if you're wanting to build a GPT-like product from scratch, you're going to need lots of data. In whatever specialist field it is that you're working in. If it's medicine, you're going to need a lot of medical reports and what have you. If it's research, you're going to need a lot of the research papers. Basically, if you want to build your own, you're going to need lots and lots and lots of data. You don't necessarily have to build one from scratch. You can fine-tune a model. That takes an awful lot less data, depending on what it is you need to do. You can get away with, I think GPT-3 can be fine-tuned with as few as like 400 samples of whatever data is that you're trying to fine-tune the system. So it depends on what it is you're trying to do. If you really do want to build your own GPT model, you're going to need a lot of data, a lot of processing. But again, that's changing very rapidly. So at least the processing time is changing rapidly. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, if you need specialists, interesting, last night while I was doing a little bit of research for today, a model has just been released, an open source model for medicine, where that has been pre-trained on a bunch of medical documentation. Don't know how good it is, but it just shows the future of where we're going for people who have access to that kind of data.
Yeah, data, and that's it.
Absolutely.
And it's still then sort of the new goal is the data. Okay.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, just add to that on the point of data. If you do have a startup, keep everything. Working in an AI company, it's almost the first thing I say to all clients is keep everything, right? That's your emails, that's your Slack conversations. If you can record all your meetings, so if you're using Zoom or Teams or whatever, if you can keep all that data, store it somewhere, you may well find that comes in useful, especially if as the context windows of these models get larger. And by context window, I mean like the amount of text it can take in any one time, and take about 8,000 words. GPT-3 can take about 4,000 words, give or take. It's quite narrow, so it can only really work with that little bit of text. They are growing and will grow rapidly. I think Claude is up to 100,000 tokens, something like that. So the time is going to come when you can essentially take your company's entire data set and put it in within the context window and ask it a question, or to build something, or to design something, or to figure out a process, or whatever it is you need to do. So if you have the resources, record all your meetings and keep everything else, you will potentially find that very useful in the near future.
Yeah, and it's a great idea, because in 1 year from now, in August 2024, you might sit at a meeting and say, hey, do we have any other ideas that we can actually add on to our product? And, oh yeah, go back to August 2023, and there you go. Now, what are the sort of, when using AI, you help also companies implement AI. What is the most surprising or unexpected outcome you've seen from integrating AI into a business?
I think it's sort of twofold. One is, especially when it comes to owners of companies, they don't really understand the technology. They either think it's very limited, or they have a belief that it's almost like magic and it can do absolutely everything. So yeah, it's people's attitudes to this tech. We all have a mental model of the world in our heads. This sort of tech challenges that a lot of the time, and some people are able to adapt to that change, and some people aren't. Obviously, working in tech, we can usually see this stuff and see where it's going, and trying to get that across to clients can be quite challenging sometimes.
And when you said we in tech can see where things are going, so if you could go back in time and sort of talk to yourself 5 years ago, what would you have said to yourself about AI?
So I would probably have told myself to stay within AI after I finish uni. That would probably have been a good idea. Back in the day, we were dealing with expert systems rather than deep learning models and what have you. So that would probably been good. Second to that, probably when I first started seeing the potential for GPT and similar models, I could see that this thing was going to become quite a big deal. I possibly didn't push it enough for those around me. I think I've got friends in various jobs in various industries. I could see that things are going to start changing for them. I should have started pushing for people to learn it. It's why one of my main pieces of advice is just have ChatGPT open up the side of your computer. Start using it, learn how to use it, learn the feedback, learn its character, learn how to do it. It's all in what we're calling prompt engineering. So the text that you type into it is the prompt that then sort of it triggers it to do stuff, and that comes with time. It comes with a little bit of practice, playing around, seeing what works. So yeah, but we're very much at the beginning of this journey. The discussion we're having just now couldn't have happened 6 months ago. Things have changed very quickly, so there's plenty of time to jump on board.
Yeah, and what do you think we have in 5 years' time?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, to be honest. These things may or may not scale. There's the belief that GPT-4 is up at something like 1 trillion parameters, and the capabilities seem to be scaling exponentially. Will that continue? How far will that continue? Is there enough data to go much further? I don't know. I suspect what's going to happen is that we're going to get more and more specialist models that are, rather than these sort of general models like GPT, are going to get much more specialist models, medical ones or genetics or financial, whatever, that would be able to work very hard. I think that obviously there's going to have great impacts on societies at large. Those who can adapt to this new reality will do well. Those who find it harder to adapt may well get left behind quite quickly. So I imagine most of the people that are here are clearly already interested in tech in some way. So we'll probably be those at the forefront of this change. So yeah, there's going to be, I imagine there's going to be a lot of change as we go, especially in all sorts of industries. I mean, there was a model released yesterday, I think, that can now do something like 18 seconds of video based on a text input, right? If you look at video from GPT models a year ago, it was nothing. It was just terrible. But now you can get 18 seconds, and that was in the matter of a few months. 5 years from now, I think something like media, you'll be able to just type in, I want a Simpsons episode, and I want it to be about cats, and boom, you'll have a whole Simpsons episode put out. But other than that, that's probably a couple of years away rather than 5 years away. Yeah. If we reach, we may even get to the point of AGI or something close to AGI within 5 years. Artificial general intelligence. So something that works much more on a human level.
Yeah, and that's it's. I mean, as a company, keep your options open, study it. And you mentioned sort of the broad models and the narrow models, and of course, like in my head, I can think of like my financial app is. Yeah, it's going to be an app, but it's also going to be very much AI-driven behind the scenes, giving me even better recommendations, for example. When it comes to MVP development, are there any emerging right now technologies and trends that you believe will, that you should keep an eye out on?
Especially for developing code, yes, there are projects at the moment essentially where you type in the software that you would like, and the code essentially will go away and create that software for you. We are getting pretty close to that. I think you'll include in the email that goes out one of the GitHub repositories that have that particular project in there. I've tried these things out, and they sort of work, sort of don't. Sometimes they get stuck in loops. But again, very alpha. This is very beginning of this journey. But the potential, potential is pretty huge for these sort of systems. So for MVPs for startups, essentially just the need to have large teams to get things done. That need will get smaller and smaller as we go.
And when you look at the growth, are we in linear or exponential mode?
Very much exponential growth. Although this stuff has dropped into the popular press recently, this has been building. Exponential growth always looks linear at first, right? Until you hit that bit of the curve where it just starts accelerating up. Moore's law has been doing its thing now for since the 1940s, and the power of the data centers is also on an exponential curve. So the mixture of those two things together mean we are accelerating very quickly, which it goes against our brains. We tend to think linearly. Like you ask me what it'd be like in 5 years' time, my mind generally will just think from here and there and extrapolate. But really, because of this rapid uptake, it's going to be quite different.
Which leads me to the last question before we go into the Q&A. How do you stay relevant on top of all of these issues and questions in AI?
So out with my working hours, I use YouTube a lot actually for a lot of these things. A lot of people correlate, bringing all this stuff together on various YouTube channels. Probably the most useful skill I've learned is to be able to speed up YouTube, to be able to watch like 2 or 3 times normal speed, so I can get through a lot of this stuff. Twitter is a great resource. YouTube is a great resource. There's a lot of email newsletters as well, which are also good resources for keeping up on all this stuff. So really just lots of reading, lots of YouTube podcasts. At this point in time, keeping on top of all of this is actually quite hard. I suspect there are likely going to be jobs coming up in the near future where your job will be just to keep on top of the new tech, assuming this keeps on going the way it is.
And when somebody says, "Oh, it's changing too fast," well, it's a new day tomorrow. What you didn't do today, you can do tomorrow and get started. As you said, listen to YouTube videos on 3 times the speed
It's a useful skill. Yeah, just a lot of reading, really, a lot of listening to keep on top of all this stuff. Obviously, you don't necessarily need to know everything about the whole field. It's impossible. But if you keep a sort of broad idea, and then you can focus in on whichever parts that are relevant to you or the company you're trying to start up.
Definitely. Adrian, big thank you for being a guest at Startup Grind and taking a part of this fireside chat.
You're welcome.
And what we'll do now is that I will bring on the team in Hong Kong. Just bring up